Hello, my friends. Today I'm bringing you a brand new interview with Charlie Deist. And Charlie is absolutely incredible. We recorded this interview probably a few weeks ago. It was a little more like summertime. And he's just fantastic. I think you're going to love this conversation. Charlie is a Master Level MovNat trainer. I'm sure many of you are familiar with MovNat or the natural method kind of philosophy of training. We talk a lot about that. He's also a licensed boat captain and sailing instructor. In fact, this interview took place while he was on a boat, which I think is my first for a first for this podcast. He's also the author and editor of several books, most recently The New Strongman Code, Building Resilient Fitness Communities in a Post-COVID Era, of which he was gracious enough to include an excerpt from yours truly. So go out and get it and see the section I wrote. But he's a fantastic guy, and we talk about a lot of great topics that I haven't covered on this podcast. For one, we talk about the kind of new MovNat movement. That's hard to say. The MovNat movement, which is basically a natural movement kind of phenomenon in fitness. That's about people really, really connecting with nature themselves, getting out of the gyms, out into the world, and embracing natural styles of movement, which I'll let trainee Charlie explain in better detail. We also talk about building tribes and communities, which is something that Charlie has a lot of experience with. We also talk a ton about how he helps his clients find the right approach to movement for their goals and the right time in their life. And it's a great conversation about how at different times in our life we would benefit from different styles of movement. That not all forms of movement serve all people at all times. And I think that's a really fascinating part of our conversation. And so without further ado, I give you this really wonderful conversation with the fantastic Charlie Deist. Enjoy! Business for Unicorns podcast is for fitness business owners who want actionable strategies to grow their business, take amazing care of their clients, and build a life and business they truly love. I'm your host, Michael Keeler, co-founder of Mark Fisher Fitness, and through Business for Unicorns, I'm a coach and consultant to industry-leading fitness studios around the world. Let's get started. Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. I'm really excited for today's conversation because I'm speaking with Charlie Deist, and we've never had him on the podcast before. So I'm super excited. This is a man who does many things. You've just heard his bio, and we're going to get into some fun topics that I haven't covered much on this podcast. So I'm excited to dive in. Let's bring Charlie to the stage. Hello. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. How's your summer going so far?
Oh, man, it's always gone too soon. But here in Berkeley, we tend to get the sort of elongated summer where September, October are often the warmest months. Just got back from a sailing trip up to the River Delta, which is northeast of San Francisco. And that's always an adventure. So I'm still recovering a little bit. It was a grueling week, but a lot of fun too.
Yeah, that's exciting. Good for you. I'm glad you're getting outdoors. You're a man who does many things. Actually, let's start there because you are a master level MovNat trainer. You're also a licensed captain and sailing instructor. They've heard all this in your bio. So I'm just curious, how do you think about your career up until this point? Just give us a brief bio of how do you think about your work and your life up until this moment.
Right. Yeah. So I wear many hats, and I don't think that I intended to go into any of the fields that I'm currently in. At least if you had told me in my early 20s that I would be sailing or producing radio, those are two hats that I wear predominantly. And then the MovNat training really came to me as first sort of saving grace during a period when I was ill for a long time and couldn't really muster the will to exercise in any of the traditional ways that were being offered to me. Going to the gym had kind of lost a little bit of its luster. I used to be a long distance runner, but found that I was just getting fatigued too easily when I would try to run distances. But there was one thing that I could do with vigor, and that was this sort of primal movement. And there was this big log up near a track and field near where I was living at the time. And I just found that there were all these permutations that I could do with this log. Shortly after that, I discovered the video, The Workout the World Forgot, which is Erwan LaCour, the founder of MovNat, doing all these natural movements in nature. And that made me realize that there was actually already a whole movement of people that were embracing this style of outdoor natural movement. So I jumped on that bandwagon, and over the next several years, I did become certified in those modalities, the MovNat, from the aquatics and combatives to just the standard MovNat practice. And I started to run a free outdoor meetup group here in Berkeley, which has been steadily gaining steam. And now we've got a great group of people, kind of a tribe of sorts, that gets together once or twice a week, and we do the full spectrum of human natural movement.
That's so exciting. Good for you. How does working on boats fit into your life at this point? Because you also do that. I
Right.
think you're on one right now.
I am. This one happens to have the best acoustics of any of the boats, with the carpeted walls and ceilings. But
Amazing.
no, I fell in love with boats, or I caught the bug, and now it's become an addiction. And as you mentioned, yeah, I got my captain's license just last year, which allows me to do things like commercial charters and to teach sailing. I teach at a local school, sailing school. But working with boats is another of my, uh, you could call it a passion, I guess. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship. A couple of weeks ago, I was wrestling with the plumbing system on an Islander 36, which was probably the most grueling workout of my life. Just this stiff hose, running new hose, and then taking out the holding tank. So I love the physicality of working with boats, and I think that it fits in with the MovNat philosophy in a few different ways. One is just the challenge of working in these tight spaces and the mobility requirements, but there's also a tie-in with one of the founders of the natural movement philosophy, who was a French naval officer named Georges Hebert. And Hebert's motto was "Be strong to be useful." I
Mm.
think he meant it more in the sense of, a natural disaster, but it also comes in handy with just everyday activities and even chores. So he was a seaman. He trained people in the arts of seafaring, and his recruits to the Navy, he found that they were most fit when they went through this battery of natural movement exercises, rather than the sort of stationary or more, whether it was the machines that they had at the time. This was the 20s and 30s when he was mainly writing and pioneering this method. But now we have the offshoots of MovNat, and even parkour is a direct descendant of Georges Hebert.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I mean, thanks for sharing your story with me because I think one of the things I found so fascinating about your life is how integrated kind of movement is into your life. It's not a thing you kind of, you go do for, 30 minutes, an hour. It seems very integrated into your life and into your hobbies and into your passions. And I see more and more people wanting to live a life that is just kind of active in that way, where they're doing things they love that require them to be physical, and they do practice at it, and they work at getting better, but it's really just kind of part of their lifestyle. And I think you're such a good example of that. Not only a great teacher, but a good just person to look up to, who seems to have some great balance in your life in that way. So bravo to you. It's great to hear.
Oh, well, thanks. I think everyone, yeah, has a different path to health and fitness, and for me, it was this primal movement. Not everyone is going to get the same rush of exhilaration from lifting rocks or lifting logs. I think everyone has to figure out, starting from, what are your values, what are your interests, and then see if your fitness practice is actually getting you closer to those goals and those values. And certainly it can be done inside, outside. I think there's definitely still a place for the traditional gym or the untraditional gym, the full spectrum. And I just have one interpretation of natural movement, even not, certainly not the only one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Well, it's great because I don't think we've really talked about that style of fitness on this podcast before, and it's one that I want to want to talk to more people about, because I think it's one that I think many of our listeners are familiar with, but don't know many practitioners. So it's great that we get to talk about it a bit. But there's a few topics I really want to get to for you, and you actually kind of hinted at one already when you talked about your kind of tribe of people in Berkeley that you get together with on a regular basis, and I really want to talk about kind of building a culture, building a culture of people in a physical space in a location. Yours is Berkeley, and you've done that, I'm sure, many times over the years. And I want to just know, what lessons have you learned about what it takes to build a culture of people in a physical space that actually assemble and meet face to face? What have you learned that works? What have you learned that has not worked in your attempt at building tribes?
Yeah, great question. And a lot of what I've learned, or what's crystallized about what's worked, uh, came from interviewing other people from other modalities, and you were one of them for this series of interviews, the Culture Club, which became a little short volume called the New Strongman Code,
Well, I
which is
think
all about how to build basically a tribe, building subculture, physical subculture, in this strange new era that we've entered after COVID. And I think that the COVID period for our tribe was a particularly potent one in terms of really defining who we were and what natural movement had to contribute during this time, and in particular outdoor natural movement. I felt like the outdoor component was something that made it, one, sort of safer to return to early on in the pandemic. And so we, by and large, outside of a couple of weeks, maybe a few months at the beginning of the pandemic, we continued to get together regularly. And initially, we were maintaining social distancing until we decided that this group was kind of our version of a pod.
sure.
And this, while other people were restricting a lot of their, unable to have so many meaningful in-person social interactions during this time, our group was really growing and thriving. And so I think that having this is something that we talked about last time when we talked about leading with values, and how that's the kind of the core of what you do with Business for Unicorns and Mark Fisher Fitness. When you lead with your values and you have a strong sense of a group identity based on those values, people naturally just keep coming back. So for a few years before the pandemic, we had people cycling in and out. And then around that time, I feel like it started to cohere into a real core group that continues to get together consistently. And that's the other key, is just making sure that there's always someone there, that someone always shows up, never skipping a week, and so that people know they can kind of structure their schedules around it. So those are the two big things: is just consistency, and then having a core set of values. And another value that I think we discovered was freedom in the largest sense of that word.
Mm,
There's like the very limited kind of political idea of freedom, which I think doesn't really get at what most people can agree on about, freedom of movement, the freedom that you get from being healthier, from being more vital. And so the freedom to move, I think, is a meta freedom of sorts. It's the freedom that underlies a lot of our other freedoms, and it's not emphasized enough in our current culture, I think.
yeah, that's beautifully said, Charlie. I think that's great. So the two things I heard from you are great for our listeners to jot down and take away is if you want to assemble a culture or subculture of people, one is to have a a sense of values, something that you want to rally around. And for you, a really great example is freedom, a large sense of freedom, freedom in our bodies, freedom to move, freedom in a broader sense. I think it's a great value. And then the second thing I heard from you is just the importance of consistency. So if you're going to be, the leader of a group that is about showing up for each other on a regular basis, then you should be showing up on a regular basis.
Right.
And there's something about that consistency that we know from research makes people trust you more, right? The more consistently you show up, not just as a person, but as a brand, even, right? As a community, the more consistent you are about what you expect from yourself and others, the more people will get a sense of comfort and trust in your group. And so I think those are great principles. So talk to me a little bit about how do you find people and figure out whether or not they actually share your values, right? I mean, how do you actually find people out in the world that care about the same kind of freedom you do, for example? So yeah, how do you think about that?
Sure. And I just want to add one other thing onto that consistency point, because I can't entirely take credit for that insight. That one came specifically from the fitness writer Dan John, who was another one of the interviewees for the Culture Club series. And I actually had a chance to, a couple times I've gotten to meet up and work out with Dan John in person at his home gym in the Utah area, or in the greater Salt Lake area, which is where my in-laws live. So this past summer, I was out there and I got to connect with him in person, which if you're ever in that area, make sure you look up Dan John, because he just has this garage gym that I think it was Australia's Men's Health magazine calls the world's greatest gym. And it's just it's a tiny little, it's a garage basically, where he's got all this great equipment. And his motto is basically just about showing up every day. And he does every weekday, every morning. Sometimes it's just him and one other person. And there were plenty of times when it was just me and my co-founder in this group, Chip Fernandez.
Yep.
There were many weeks, and we love those times, but the more the merrier. And as people have come in, I think they get a feel pretty quickly for whether or not it's something that they like. And let's say a quarter of the people that ever show up start to come back as regulars over a couple of months. That's a pretty good growth rate. You don't have to please everybody. And if you try to please everybody, you're not going to end up really pleasing anybody. So I think that being clear on your values, not forcing them down anyone's throat, but letting the group self-select along the dimensions of the values that you've set, and trusting that people will be kind of attracted, that law of attraction. If you put the intention out there, then other like-minded people are going to find their way to you. A lot of people come to us just through meetup.com. Word of mouth has been a big one. And friends of mine who know that I do this, at first they just think of it as this weird movement thing. They come and check it out and realize that it's actually the tribe of people that they've been looking for. So I think it's not one thing, and I can get a little bit woo-woo in thinking about how the universe connects people, especially in Berkeley. Berkeley's got that weird energy that just brings people together.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, I love what you said there about letting people kind of self-select in. They know within a visit or two whether or not this is really for them, because I imagine you all will have these gatherings in a way that aligns with your values, and all the things you're teaching, I'm sure, align with your values. So if they're vibing with it and that they're enjoying it, they're going to keep coming back. And the people who don't feel an instant connection are going to go, and that's okay. It's okay. Right. That's actually what you want. The same thing is true for, brick and mortar gyms. Is often that's what happens in our trial periods or our low barrier offers or whatever you want to call it. That moment where people come and test us out. It's seeing, are we aligned on energy? Are we aligned on values? Are we aligned on the kind of fitness you do? Are we aligned on the kind of people that are in the room? Do I want to be with them? Do I not? And all those things people are feeling out. And sometimes it's not the right fit, and they'll disappear because one of those things is not right. And right. Sometimes they can articulate it to you. Sometimes they can't. But I think that's part of attracting your tribe, is there's going to be some people that it's not a fit for, and it's okay that they go. It's okay that they don't convert to long-term returners in your case. That's great. So, a similar topic, this is another thing that's really challenging with kind of being the leader of a group or a tribe, which is, I find often, and this has been true at Mark Fisher Fitness, it's been true at Business for Unicorns, my past jobs, is that, change is hard. And a group that really bonds and trusts each other and spends a lot of time together, so a lot of times, those kinds of groups need to change and evolve and grow over time. There's a kind of a natural evolution to how groups change and evolve over time. And for some people, that change is difficult. That change is hard. And as a leader, you want to try and make sure everyone stays comfortable, stays trusted, stays in a relatively safe space. So how do you do that as a leader? As this group's been around for a while, as you said, and how do you deal with any tension or conflict that comes when there's changes in the group?
Yeah. What jumps to my mind, kind of just off the top of my head, we have a lot of great landscapes in Berkeley. We started up mostly at parks and places where there would just be minimum infrastructure of like a grassy field plus maybe a children's playground structure. And at that time, my co-founder Chip, he had a young son. Now his son is like out of high school, so we can't use him as our ticket to the playground anymore. I guess now my daughter, who's 16 months old, she's up and coming. She'll be our next ticket to the playground. But we moved around a little bit and found different spaces to just meet the size of the group that we were in, the number of people showing up. And we tried to keep some variety in it, we later moved up to a place where up near the Rose Garden in Berkeley, where there's a nice wooded grove, a little bit more of a wild terrain than what we were typically doing at the parks. And then recently we've shifted mostly down to the Berkeley Marina, which is my home base, not doing stuff specifically related to boats, but it just happens to be a great space. And there's this one tree in particular that really speaks to us. Again, going back to the Berkeley kind of
Sure.
tree hugger, tree sitter ethos, we always meet up at this one tree called the Infinity Tree, where there's just infinite permutations of movement that you can do in connection with this tree. But how has the group evolved? Obviously, COVID changed things, and
Hmm.
figuring out people's comfort levels with different kinds of activities. There are certain things in MovNat that where it really helps to have some human touch. And so there was that initial period when we had to forego that and improvise different kinds of games, things like tug of war, or even our usual handshake, which is the kind of the warrior handshake up at the forearm. We
Sure.
we we change things up for a little while. And for the we don't wear masks outdoors. I don't think that the science is really telling us that for the most part we have to wear masks outdoors at this stage. But there are still some people who maybe live with someone who's immune compromised who do choose to wear masks. And so even though our culture might be one of trying to breathe freely and be out in the open air, we're not going to ostracize anyone for making that choice. It's completely valid, and it's up to the individual to determine a little bit of their own level of risk, their tolerance for that, for different kinds of risks, which also of course applies to movement and the risks involved in certain kinds of outdoor movement as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I heard a lot of great stuff in there, Charlie. I mean, one of the things I heard you say was there's some sense of exploration there, like trying different things in your community to see what works. And I also heard you mention that last example was really kind of meeting people where they're at, making sure it's okay if they make a choice that goes against the grain, making sure that you're bringing them along for the ride if you do make changes, either to location or to COVID-related changes. And so I think those are really great things for our listeners to consider is if you're going to be the leader of a tribe or a group in some way, making sure that you are in constant dialogue with them about what's working and not working. And this last year, like you said, has been a perfect example of constant change, all kinds of things happening on a regular basis that are new and different and can be scary for people. And I think that those things of constantly having kind of a playful or experimental point of view can be useful, and also meeting people where they're at, making it okay for them to make different choices that go against the grain. I think those are all really great things to consider. Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit because there's other topics I want to cover. When I asked you some things you liked talking about before this call started, one of the things you mentioned was the Pareto Principle. And so I just talk to our audience a little bit about what that is so they know what it is. And I want to talk a little bit about how you apply that to your life. So what is the Pareto Principle and why does it matter in your life?
Sure. So the Pareto Principle, sometimes called the power law or the 80-20 rule, basically says that we get most of our outputs from a small number of inputs. There was this Italian political economist named Vilfredo Pareto, who I think he first noticed that the pea pods in his garden followed
Mm-hmm.
this distribution where a small number of the pea pods gave him the most peas, or the small number of the plants. And then he found the same pattern showing up all over the place, from society where maybe 80% of the criminals commit 20% of the criminals commit 80% of the crimes. That's sort of a dark example. On a more positive note, you could look at something like venture capital returns, where you get uh, 80 or maybe even 90 or 99% of your returns from 20, 10, or even 1% of the companies. And when I look at how this applies to fitness, I think the distillation would just be try to get the most out of your workouts. Don't be obsessed with working out every day if the quality of your workout and your motivation can't be sustained for an everyday routine. And in particular with strength workouts, I save my strength workouts for when I'm really in the mood for it, when I feel like I have that energy to push just a little bit harder, because most of your strength gains come from a pretty small window of effort. So there's something that I call the power law workout, which is taking the five biggest muscle groups, or maybe taking two or three out of the five and working that group to failure. So lots of different philosophies of strength and fitness. I don't think that one is necessarily right for everybody, but I take this one from Doug McGuff, the author of Body by Science. And so just applied to sort of physiology and fitness, I think that we can get a lot by following the power law. And the same thing with just natural movement in general. It tends to follow this the same pattern where you're putting in a lot of effort at certain parts of the workout, and then you have a lot of time just to relax. So in a given 90-minute session, we might have 10 or 15 minutes where we're doing really higher intensity stuff, and the rest of the time we can goof off. Even though sometimes goofing off also involves these little bursts of effort. Like if you're playing,
Sure.
have you played tug of war in the last few years at any point? I hadn't played this in years, but
I haven't, but I can imagine that's a good example.
it's a lot of fun. It's about 10 seconds of all out, and then one person gets pulled over the line, and
Yeah.
then you can just laugh at yourself and hang out for a bit.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I love that. And I think that I see this principle applied to so many places in fitness and in business. And so I'm curious how you answer this. So obviously, a lot of our listeners are fitness business owners, entrepreneurs. And for many of our clients, they haven't figured out what that 20% of effort looks like for them when it comes to their fitness routines or their workouts on a regular basis. They're still trying to figure out what is the best use of their energy and time when it comes to that 20% that's going to get them the 80% of results they're looking for. How do you help people that you've worked with find out what does that effort look like for them? How do you get them to figure out of all the choices they can make for where to put their energy and effort into fitness, how to find what the 20% looks like?
Ooh, that's a great question. And applied to fitness, the advice that I usually give does have to do with resistance training. I think that there's so many different kinds of strength, and the ability to lift heavy things is fairly narrow in the scheme of things. I mostly do body weight resistance training. I don't use weights, but I think that especially as people age, it's important to have, even if it's just once a week or a couple times a month, to put some real stress on your musculoskeletal system, because this is what is responsible for the decline in bone density, which means that if you fall, you're much more likely to get injured. You're more likely to fall in the first place. And I think that there's another really kind of dark statistic has to do with the mortality rate after somebody falls and breaks their hip. It's just skyrockets. So maintaining strength into old age and aging gracefully, getting that heavy resistance training in occasionally where you're really putting that effort in. Again, the protocols, there's a zillion protocols out there. I've used the Doug McGuff Body by Science protocol, and that's what I tend to advise people. I had a previous book called Hormetics, which is all about the art of beneficial stress. And there's a chapter in there on the power law workout, which is very easy to follow. It doesn't require any equipment, and it's the kind of thing that you can do in your living room once or twice a month and get pretty profound benefits, I think. At least that's what I would tell my parents or grandparents or anyone who's just looking to start somewhere.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And I love that it starts by kind of zooming out and thinking about where are you in your life, right? What does your body need at this stage of your life? Because I imagine it's different if you're a 20-year-old than if you're a 60-year-old. And there's different kinds of stress you can put your body through. They're going to get you different results. So knowing what your goals or the results are that you're looking for will help you kind of narrow down your options for what that 20% of effort looks like. So I think that's a great place to start. Yeah.
And from a business perspective, I've found that when it comes to getting the word about my particular methodology or philosophy of fitness, there's all these different platforms and social media companies, and people can spend a lot of time trying to custom create tailored content for every single platform under the sun, and then not end up really reaching anyone on any of these places, whether it's with paid ads or things like that. I found just having a standard mailing list newsletter where I focus on getting kind of people that are really targeted, finding related organizations and groups, places that share some aspect of my philosophy in an adjacent space, um, making kind of a win-win partnership with them so that we can cross-pollinate our audiences and really like get people to learn from the respective approaches, that this works better than the kind of Facebook ads or trying to be everything to everyone. Again, so it's a very focused, it's a power law type of approach to
Hmm.
growing an audience.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Charlie. That email marketing, it can still be hugely beneficial, especially in our space. And if you can do what you were just mentioning there, which is maintain a really great list of people who you think are aligned in the work you do, but then also grow that list by partnering with other companies, organizations, tribes out there who are doing related and complementary things. You can continue to grow that email list, and email is still king in many circles. So I think that's a great tip. Let's switch gears. I think we have time for one more topic. Another thing that I know you like talking about is how to manage risk and kind of minimize danger. So, talk a little bit about what you mean by that. What does it mean to you to kind of manage a risk and kind of minimize danger?
Right. My motto is no, safety second at least. I shouldn't say that because in reality, as someone who's a trainer or a coach, you are, if you're directing people in movements that they might not be comfortable with, safety has to be paramount. But at the same time, I think that there's this trend in modern life to try to insulate ourselves from all risk, ultimately at the expense of our health. And so the greatest risk of all is to not take any risks, basically. And there's a difference between risk, which is something you can manage. It's something that you can kind of account for and minimize. And then there's danger, which you really want to uh, eliminate or completely minimize altogether. So this is where I might differ a little bit from people in the parkour space, who, if you pursue parkour independently and you're responsible for yourself, knock yourself out. But if I'm going to be demonstrating things or showing techniques to someone, I don't want that acrobatic component or the daredevil techniques to take precedence over, having fun in a safe way. So with MovNat, we distinguish between risk, which again is something that we can kind of quantify, or at least, ensure that there's a very low probability of something going wrong. And you can ensure that by doing progressions, by starting with a simplified version of the movement before working your way up. A really common area where I see people hurting themselves in the primal natural movement space is with barefoot running.
Mm,
And if you grow up barefoot, and if like our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they had no problem running long distances barefoot, probably. But for modern people who aren't used to that and have worn shoes for their entire lives, you've got to take it slow, and you've
mm.
got to progress through the stages of first getting the technique down and then getting your feet adjusted to walking on bare ground. But I do think that in the end, getting closer to nature, where there are always variables that you might not get indoors, is worth a little bit of risk, as long as you're not putting yourself in danger.
Yeah, I think it's a great distinction, Charlie. The ability to distinguish for yourself and for your clients that there's risk that can be useful. There's risk that can be helpful in our growth and challenging ourselves, get outside our comfort zones, both physically and mentally. And there's danger. There's things that are just inherently dangerous that might not be worth the risk. And so, how do you introduce those ideas to clients and get them to understand the benefits of taking risks?
To bring it back to the last year, I think that we've seen the initial pendulum swing towards seeking safety. And again, it's an individual decision that in many cases is the right decision to make, to maybe try to eliminate any risk whatsoever. But I think that for the majority of people, uh, we're starting to realize that, life is not a, uh, we have a kind of limited opportunity to uh, get out into the world and figure out, what's our role to play. And if we huddle, if we uh, avoid risk altogether, then we're probably going to miss out on some part of our greater calling. And that idea of
Mm,
being strong to be useful, you never know who you might touch or reach by uh, kind of putting yourself out there in the world. This is something that I learned in theater as well, in improv.
yep.
The ability to get on stage, being willing to kind of make a fool out of yourself, and if something goes horribly wrong, just to be able to throw up your hands and say "woohoo." That's an improv thing. I wouldn't advise that in a scripted play. Um, but I still have those nightmares of getting on stage, being unprepared, and having forgotten my lines or never learned my lines. Do you
Sure.
get those?
I do have thoughts of that sometimes, especially that 'cause I still do, well, pre-COVID was still doing some like presenting and speaking and workshops and just getting in front of a room and being like, I have no idea what to say next. And yeah, that still happens. But you're right. If we have some, some theater trainings and improv training, you learn to kind of roll with the punches and be present in the moment and, and you know how to recover. You don't
Right,
need the conditions to always be perfect to perform well. And I think that's the point I'm hearing you make, which is, I think, so valuable that, a life lived in a petri dish with perfectly controlled conditions and context is maybe not a life worth living. Right?
right.
That there's
But we
there's
can
some.
also be prepared, and if we train in a more controlled environment, then when the actual situations do arise, then we're better able to manage risk. There's this great term from George Hebert. I don't know the original French language for this, but he talks
Sure.
about an even keel, which
Mm,
is another great sailing metaphor, where the keel is the heavy fin that comes down below the bottom of the boat to counterbalance the force on the sails. And I think we all need to develop that keel, that even keel that will just keep us moving forward when the winds get to be stronger. The proverbial winds of change, or the storms that come at us in life. If we have a solid grounding in our bodies, a lot of times I like to just kind of sit into my pelvic girdle, which I think of as the body's keel. So much power comes from our hips. So just being able to kind of relax and center yourself onto that pelvic girdle is one very practical way that you can center yourself, get that even keel, and be better prepared for whatever adverse circumstances come your way.
yeah, I think it's a beautiful metaphor, Charlie, and I think that and we can't help people train for real life surprises and storms, using your metaphor, right? That without actually having some risk in the practice, without having some risk in the practice that does challenge their sense of balance, does challenge their sense of psychological or physical safety just a little, just a
Right,
little, so that they're actually training on the edge of their ability in an area where they're not completely comfortable. Because I think that the opposite is a kind of perfectionism where we try to control everything so that nothing bad could possibly happen, and we know it's not realistic. And from what I understand, not the most healthy way to go about your life. It's controlling every circumstance so that you'll never be in a storm. You'll never be surprised. You'll never be outside your comfort zone. And I think that's what most people want in getting better, both physically and mentally. So I think that's a beautiful metaphor to leave folks with. Amazing. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I'm sure we could keep on going. There's so many more threads to pull in just this topic alone, but I want to be respectful of our time and wrap things up a little bit. So let me do this. Let me dive into our final 5 questions.
all
So
right.
you've probably heard these before, listen to the podcast, but it's 5 questions I ask every guest. And they're just 5 questions about being a fitness professional, what you like about it, how do you manage your time, how do you work with your clients. So let's dive in and do this, Charlie. Question number one is, what is one thing you just love about being a fitness professional?
Being able to use my body in a way that I know is delivering value for other people. A lot of times when I get stuck up in my head or working on the computer, when it's all in this realm of the abstract, so I sometimes wonder, what is the bottom line? What is the value of this activity? Whereas when it's something embodied, and when I can can kind of transmit that same sense of purposeful embodiment to other people, I know that I'm giving something of value. I don't have to question that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, beautiful. Well said. Question number two. This is really about a client experience. We talk a lot about this podcast about over delivering for our clients, creating a good experience for our clients, people in our communities. So, can you think back to a specific example of something that you did that was really cool or really memorable to kind of over deliver or create a great experience for a client of yours or someone in your tribe? What would that be? Something you did that for them to create an experience that was really unique or memorable?
I'm going to give an example from some sailing students of mine
Great.
recently, because sailing is, even though it's not strictly in the fitness industry, it was actually it was a father daughter, and the daughter was doing it to fulfill her school's independent physical education requirement.
Nice.
And so we were out on San Francisco Bay on the solstice weekend, which in the Bay Area, the sailing community celebrates summer solstice. And there's a magazine called Latitude 38, the local cruising and sailing magazine, that was putting on a treasure hunt where
Mm,
they gave a list of 12 things to look for on the bay on solstice weekend, and take pictures of each one. And it just happened that it coincided with the day of the sailing instruction where we were supposed to be doing a bay tour, a trip around Angel Island, and got to get the full scope of the bay and the full coastal cruising experience. And so I sort of surprised them with this additional challenge of not only were we going to be doing the bay tour, we were also going to try to get as many of these treasure hunt pictures as possible. And in the end, I think we got 11 out of 12, and we won the competition.
amazing. Congrats. That's a really great story. I love that. And I love that she was able to do something like that for a physical education requirement. I wish my school would have let me do that. Awesome. Question number three. This is about coworkers or people you work with on your team. When someone you work with on your team does this, it makes you really happy. So what's the kind of thing that you just love when people you work with do? What's the behavior?
I love it when they take the lead, when when they see that I'm struggling with
Mm,
something, and they kind of step in and graciously pick up the baton and kind of guide the group. And that's one of the beautiful things about this distributed leadership model that we have in our meetup group. There's me and the co-founder Chip, and then there's also a woman who named Susie, who's very commonly the leader if both Chip and I can't make it. And then we've got another guy that just got certified as a level 2 MovNat trainer, and on a couple occasions we've been able to tap him to step up. So when people kind of step into that leadership role when it's needed, that's extremely gratifying to see.
yeah, beautiful. I love that. Yeah, people can see that you're struggling or take the initiative to step up and contribute. That's amazing. Cool. Question number four. This is kind of about marketing, lead generation, which we touched on briefly. But what's your most reliable strategy for generating leads? So if you want more people to join your community tomorrow, where's the first place you turn?
Right. Again, it goes back to the kind of the partnerships, and then having something compelling to offer people as an opt-in. And for a long time, the lead generator that was working best for me was a little guide called Poor Man's Paleo.
Mm.
It's like recipes and shopping tips for thriving on less than $10 a day. Since the primal movement and the paleo diet kind of are a natural marriage, that was something and because food and frugality are two other uh, big big things of mine. That's been one of my most effective lead magnet generators, and people can
Yeah.
find that, by the way, on my website, which is anaturalmethod.com. But just having something really juicy to entice people as a reason for signing up for that newsletter, and then
Yeah.
just trying to get the eyeballs of people who are already kind of primed for that kind of material.
Yeah, that's well said. So really great lead magnet and or partnerships with other people who you can grow your list by partnering with, I think is fantastic. Awesome.
Making sure that the partner is getting something out of it too, that you put
Sure.
that win for the partner right up
Yeah,
front.
making a real win-win for sure. I love it. Well, last one, question number five. What is one thing in your opinion, fitness professionals or gym owners can start doing better tomorrow? What's just like a low-hanging fruit suggestion you have for the fit pros listening that they can just start doing better tomorrow?
Yeah, I think this comes back to the core thesis of this new strongman code, which is about building resilient physical culture after COVID, and it's about finding your core values and creating a subculture around an identity, figuring out what differentiates you, and then maybe to get a little more concrete, thinking about how your local bioregion, how your outdoor spaces and locale can play into that identity. So Berkeley is quite a hodgepodge. We actually get people from all over the Bay Area, but the East Bay, it's sort of known as being a hodgepodge of different cultural identities, and it also offers just such a rich assortment of outdoor areas. But
Mm,
most places have at least some kind of an outdoor space, or something attached to their bioregion that can be creatively worked into the workouts, or if you even conceive of it as a workout. We did something called the 50-mile march, which was JFK's challenge to the nation and to some of his army officers to make sure that they were still actually capable of doing a long distance march.
mm,
So we've done this a couple years running, where this year we did it over 2 days, starting up in Point Reyes, the scenic seashore, and then walking all the way over the course of 2 days down to the Golden Gate Bridge. So covering about 25 miles a day. And this was with the core MovNat tribe, but it also brought in people from different walks of life. And we had the family members and friends of these people, which then gives them exposure. So trying to find outdoor things in your area that can be used as catalysts for getting people to think about their health, um, in ways that don't fit the traditional fitness paradigm.
yeah, I love that. That's great. That's a great tip, Charlie. I think it's beautiful because so many people listening, I know, are scattered all over the world, and they have such, biodiversity in their backyards, many of them, that they can use to leverage to gather people together and find new ways of interacting outside of the four walls of their gym. And I think that's a great, great thing to consider. Awesome. Well, you nailed it. 5 questions, crushed it. So let's wrap this thing up and tell our listeners how they can find you. How can they find you online if they want to know more about your work? Get your book, which I showed already, but I'll show again. We'll link to down below. Where can they find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, my website is anaturalmethod.com. Not claiming it's the one and only natural method, but it is a natural method.
Sure.
And there you'll also find the link to this new book, which the paperback is on Amazon, but I'm giving away the PDF to anyone who wants it, because it's composed of interviews with Michael. You're one of those interviews, one of 6 people. I'm calling you guys the philosopher kings of fitness, people who have really thought deeply about what it means to build physical subculture and community. And so check out those interviews. I'm also on the usual suspects of social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, although I'm most active with my newsletter. So you'd want to sign up for the newsletter if you're curious about my overall ethos and the values of my particular physical subculture.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you, Charlie. We'll include links to all of that down below. This has been such a great conversation. I actually am taking a lot away myself, and I'm sure our listeners are as well. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it from you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, friends, before you go, just one more thing. If you enjoy this podcast, you get value out of it, you enjoy listening, please share this podcast, comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Please share it with friends and family. We don't spend any money on marketing or advertising. And so the only way people find out about this podcast is from you. So please do everything you can to share it with friends and fellow colleagues in the fitness industry. We love making it, and we want to keep doing it for a long, long time. So I appreciate your support. Go have a kick-ass day. Bye.